Hello and welcome to the Street Crime Australia YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we're going to take a look at the life of a notorious Australian criminal who will never be forgotten about in the Australian criminal underworld. Brenden James Abbott was born on the 8th of May 1962 and was a convicted Australian bank robber. Mr. Abbott is reported to have stolen and hidden millions of Australian dollars and was dubbed the Postcard Bandit by police seeking media coverage. Mr. Abbott was held in a maximum security prison in Queensland until he was transferred in 2016 to Casuarina Prison in Western Australia. He will be eligible for parole in 2026. A film about Mr. Abbott, The Postcard Bandit, was made in 2003. A former ward of the state of Western Australia, Mr. Abbott continues to suffer anxiety and related health disorders, as noted in a semi-biographical work, Australian Outlaw by Derek Pedley. As a hearing impaired 12-year-old in November 1974, he was maltreated at Hillston's Boy Home. Mr. Abbott attended Eastern Hills High School in Mount Helena and was considered an average to good student. His watercolour, Little Blue Boy, was painted after the November 2009 National Apology to Forgotten Australians. Mr. Abbott is recognised as a highly intelligent criminal and a minor genius with a strong reliance on memory and observational skills to carry out his criminal activity. Mr. Abbott used his knowledge and self-taught skills in makeup to create convincing disguises. He used computers to create false IDs and electronics to dodge alarms and police. Weeks were spent meticulously planning each bank robbery, including observing the staff in the bank, identifying the weaknesses in security, patterns of behaviour and the layout of the premises prior to the robbery taking place. These skills were widely thought to have assisted him in both successful prison escapes. Police officers who had interviewed Mr. Abbott have stated he is always probing for information on how he's been caught or what the police know about him. Mr. Abbott used his understanding of police procedure and intelligence gathering to successfully avoid capture during his time as an escapee. Mr. Abbott had fled from the police during questioning in relation to a burglary at Nollamara police station in 1986 and in 1987 successfully stole $11,200 from the Commonwealth Bank in Perth with his first bank robbery. In the month following, police arrested Mr. Abbott at Perth Airport. Sentenced to Fremantle Prison, Mr. Abbott was given duties in the tailor workshop, fitting and sewing uniforms to order. It was through the workshop that Mr. Abbott and Aaron Reynolds were able to create fake prison guard uniforms. On the 24th of November 1989, Mr. Abbott, dressed in the false uniform, cut through the bars in the workshop and gained access to the guard's walkway. He made his way across the route and out of the prison grounds. This escape earned Mr. Abbott his lifelong notoriety as a criminal genius and ultimately led to his permanent and erroneous branding as the Postcard Bandit. In the almost 150-year history that Fremantle Prison was operational, Mr. Abbott is the only prisoner to escape and never return due to its closure in 1991. Mr. Reynolds was arrested within weeks of the Fremantle escape. Mr. Abbott went on to establish himself as a professional bank robber, believed to have been responsible to 40 to 50 bank robberies across Western Australia, South Australia and Queensland's Gold Coast. Working in Mr. Abbott's favour, the Adelaide Police Force was structured with each suburb having its own CIB office, limiting communication between the departments and making Adelaide a repeated target. Rivalry between the states made intelligence sharing minimal, and Western Australian police were yet to issue a warrant for Mr. Abbott's arrest, almost 5 years following the escape. By 1994, the police states compromised and agreed to work together. Elevated to the status of Australia's most wanted man, his 5.5 years on the run came to an end when police tracked down a post office box in Queensland Gold Coast used by Mr. Abbott, which was found to contain pager bills registered to an address where he was living. On the 26th of March 1995, Mr. Abbott was recaptured. Media reports in the 1990s said that Mr. Abbott sent postcards of his travels to Western Australian police. However, the story was a Western Australian police media unit concoction. The postcards were photos Mr. Abbott lost whilst running from the police with Aaron Reynolds after the Fremantle prison escape and were intended for his family and friends. They included a picture of Mr. Reynolds outside the Dwelling Up police station. On the 5th of November 1997, less than 3 years after his recapture, Mr. Abbott escaped with 4 other prisoners from Sir David Longland Prison in Warkall, Queensland. Using angel wire a diamond-encrusted wire, which had been smuggled into the prison to cut through the bars of their cells. The escapees made it to the premier centre fence, where they were thrown bolt cutters by an accomplice, Brenden James, who had been released in September. Uncharacteristically for Mr. Abbott, the escape from Sir David Longland Prison in November 1997 actually involved force rather than implied threat of force. While cutting through the centre fencing, the alarm was raised. Mr. Berrichon was alarmed and fired on the vehicle patrol, successfully disabling it. The guards were pinned down by the shots. The offenders alleged that this occurred in panic when the plan was not going how it was meant to. Nevertheless, it gave the escapees enough time to cut through the fence and escape in a car driven by Mr. Berrichon. Mr. Abbott was on the run for 6 months, from 1997 to 1998. On the 2nd of May 1998, he was eventually caught in Darwin and is, as of March 2015, serving a 23-year sentence in Queensland for bank robberies and the 1997 prison escape. Following his recapture, Mr. Abbott was transferred to maximum security at Woodford Correctional Centre. Due to Mr. Abbott's high-risk profile, he was flown to the prison by helicopter, being the only prison in Australia to have arrived directly by air. After serving 2 years of his current sentence in solitary confinement, he sued Queensland's government for mistreatment. Mr. Abbott was released from solitary confinement in May 2004 and returned there on a maximum security order in April 2006, after he requested medical attention 3 times in 12 months. After years in the mainstream, Mr. Abbott was again returned to Supermax solitary confinement in August 2008 and then released back into mainstream detention in the days preceding the judicial review hearing into his back-to-back maximum security orders in October 2009. A 1994 warrant for questioning remains in place with Adelaide Criminal Prosecutions Branch for 1 count of armed robbery in Glenelg, South Australia. In mid-2008, Mr. Abbott applied for an interstate transfer to South Australia to address the outstanding warrant. The application followed official statements by Adelaide detective Sid Thomas in The Advertiser in 2008 that detectives were travelling to Queensland to question Mr. Abbott at the Woodford Correctional Centre, although no such interview has ever occurred. In December 2010, Mr. Abbott's application for South Australian transfer was approved by the Queensland Attorney General, and the South Australian Attorney General's decision is pending. On the 12th of June 2011, the Advertiser's reporter Nigel Hunt incorrectly reported that Mr. Abbott had filed for Supreme Court judicial review regarding the application to transfer to face the charges. Mr. Hunt's story concludes with an unnamed source suspicions that Mr. Abbott could have committed not just one he is sought for questioning over, but multiple robberies in South Australia. During Mr. Abbott's Queensland sentence, Western Australia twice refused Mr. Abbott's transfer application in 2005 and 2008 to return to the state to complete his sentence. In 2004, Queensland authorities approved the interstate transfer, but Western Australian Attorney General Jim McGuinty refused to accept him. In early 2007, Mr. Abbott's reapplied to be transferred to Western Australia, and that was approved by the Queensland Attorney General in 2008. However, former West Australian Corrective Service Minister Margaret Quirk promptly released a media statement rejecting Mr. Abbott's bid to return home. Mr. Abbott had unsuccessfully applied for transfer to Western Australia 4 times in response to the outstanding warrants. In May 2010, Glenn Cordingley of the Sunday Times in Perth cited an unnamed Western Australian police source who alleged that the Western Australian authorities had a cell waiting for Mr. Abbott, although there had been no official confirmation of such. On the 4th of May 2016, Mr. Abbott was extradited to a prison in Western Australia to serve out his sentence of 16 years, 9 months and 2 days that he was serving for armed robberies and his role in a Fremantle prison riot at the time of his escape in 1989. That was a 12 years, 6 months and 24 days, plus an additional 1/3 additional penalty of 4 years, 2 months and 8 days for forfeited remissions and escaping custody under the law then extant. On the 16th of January 2017, Mr. Abbott was sentenced to an additional 5 months imprisonment for the 1989 escape. In June 2019, Mr. Abbott had his latest bid for freedom unanimously rejected by the Court of Appeal. Lawyers argued that the sentence should have been reduced because he had already spent 17 years in a Queensland jail for other crimes committed before he had escaped Fremantle Prison in 1989. The court said that the original sentences were approximate and it would not intervene on the basis of mercy and noted that Mr. Abbott deliberately committed crimes that led to his imprisonment in Queensland. Mr. Abbott will be eligible for parole in Western Australia in July 2026, and his Western Australia sentence will expire in July 2033. If no further charges are laid against him, he will remain on parole in Queensland until July 2040, when he will be 78 years of age. Thank you for joining us today. What are your opinions on the crimes committed by Brenden Abbott? Do you believe Western Australia should have let him back in, or should they have kept him out? What are your opinions on his sentence? Do you think it was too harsh or not harsh enough? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and would like to see more Street Crime Australia content, then please don't forget to press subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.